But who can hide a heart when it's on fire? This quote is from The Story of Layla and Majnun, just one part of the 12th century Persian epic Kamsa. Written by Nizami Ganjavi, this part of his poem tells the story of the poet Qais and the beautiful princess Layla. She was his muse, inspiring so many poems that the townspeople called him Majnun, the madman. This reputation was what doomed their love. Layla's father, the king, forbade her from marrying Majnun as it would bring shame upon her and the family. This drove Majnun to the end of his mind. For real this time. For years, he wandered the forests and deserts, always in search of his true love. Layla is betrothed to someone else and, depending on the translation, either dies of illness or a broken heart. Only in death would the lovers be reunited. Some 800 years later, a copy of Layla and Majnun fell into the lap of one Eric Clapton. Clapton was no poet or king, but in the late 1960s, it was safe to call him God. He was the most respected guitarist to come out of the British blues band scene. He had the money, he had the cars, the rock and roll lifestyle, the big house in the countryside. He had best-selling records from not one, not two, but 3 different bands. He could have any woman he wanted. The woman in question was Pattie Boyd, a fashionable, in-demand top model. So, if you're the guitarist nicknamed God, what do you do to win over your object of affection? You write a whole album for her, obviously. But there's just one problem, one teensy little snag in the picture. Not only was Pattie the one woman Eric couldn't have, she was his best friend's wife. Thus, that record would become rock and roll's great act of hubris, the hurricane that destroyed everything in its path. Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is the story of my favorite album. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If deep dives aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. Welcome everyone to the season 3 finale. It's been one hell of a ride and the best season of Vinyl Monday to date. There was only ever one choice for this week, because in order to go forward, you must first go back. This week's album, quote, the name of this miracle of creation was Layla. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what the next album is gonna be. I host polls where sometimes you get to pick what's on the show. I make announcements when I'm places that aren't here, like my podcast posting a new episode on Friday, or the break that I will inevitably be taking after this season finale. You can find all of that on my channel. Okay, so why are we doing this again? The 2 years since the original Layla video have been a long, strange trip, with Vinyl Monday constantly growing and evolving along the way. The biggest difference between then and now? Production value? Editing? Audio quality when my mic decides to work? Learning how to do my hair and makeup? No, it's because I actually learned how to write about music. Don't believe me? Watch the original Kick Out the Jams video and MC5ABH back to back. Or revisit the original Layla video after you're done with this. I love the AD from 2 years ago, but she just couldn't articulate what she heard here. She was just out of her depth, but the original Layla video is central to this channel, and this channel is the bulk of my resume as a writer. Quite frankly, Layla is too important to me and to this for there not to be an up-to-date, deserving, competent evaluation. So, for the last time this season, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is a I've got some serious explaining to do. I've got 6. This was my first copy on the Atco label from 1970. You'll have to wait a few chapters to hear about this one. I have this beater copy from the same label and same run. A 1977 repress on Polydor. This was fished out of a cutout bin once upon a time. I found it at an antique store. The 20th anniversary CD box set was a gift from my dad, either for a birthday or a Christmas, I can't remember. The 50th anniversary box set was for sure a birthday gift. This includes the original album, remastered at Abbey Road Studios, material from the ill-fated Domino's LP2 sessions, and the Domino's appearance on the Johnny Cash show. And this, a UK original copy in pretty damn good condition. This was a hand-me-down album. A pen pal from across the pond upgraded his copy to one in perfect condition and handed off the old one to me. Thank you so much. I am eternally grateful for your hand-me-downs. Oh, and I have that. Break glass in case of Layla emergency. Why do I have all of these copies of Layla? Well, shit, it's my favorite album. I went through a phase where I bought it every time I saw it, but I'm noting them all here now because all the different mixes will come into play when we eventually get to the review chapter of this video. For now, since there's so much of it at hand, let's talk about this cover art. The story of how the Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs cover came to be can best be described by this quote from The Story of Layla and Majnun. Quote, "Who can decipher fate's handwriting?" The painting on the front cover is La Jeune Fille au Bouquet by Theodore Franzdon. How did Eric come across this painting? The album credits might give us a hint. They thank the artist's son Emile, quote, "for the abuse of his house." In early August of 1970, Derek and the Dominos were scheduled to play the Popinalia Festival in the south of France. They stayed at Franzdon's farmhouse. However, the whole festival was cancelled when the revolutionaries burned the stage! The guys spent the next couple days just chilling at the farm. They got bored and started an egg fight in the kitchen. Emile found them, invited them out to his father's studio, where Eric laid eyes on the painting. He saw the face of a woman. Platinum blonde hair, one exaggerated cat eye, red lips against blue, gold, and red. But what I imagine Eric too, find so intriguing about this painting is that it's unclear where its subject begins and her surroundings end. Half her face is obscured by her bouquet. Our brains have to fill in what the rest of her face might look like. The blue of the paper around her bouquet blends into the blue of the background at a first glance. See this one gray ribbon crossing from the background to in front of the woman, and we see her right shoulder, but where is her left? Emile gave the painting to Eric when the Dominos left France, more on its fate later. Opening up the gatefold, we see a collage of Polaroids taken by Bobby Whitlock and Robert Stigwood's assistant Robin Turner. I have no idea how Disney didn't sue their asses off for the Mickey Mouse cameo. On the back cover, Bobby couldn't remember much more than the record label, quote, "sending down some cat from New York to do it. 2 years later, and I still cannot find who took this photo." But this is what he had to say about the shoot. Quote, "We threw the Dominos down, put Eric's shoes in there, I call them his cheerleader shoes, and I came back and threw down some cigarette butts. Robin got upset about it, but I thought it made it a little more real. The only thing we didn't put in there was a line of coke." On Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, we have Derek and the Dominos, as this edition of the cover says, in green right here. This is the very famous Art Nouveau font Metropolitan. Anyway, it's Derek and the Dominos. That's,
ladies and gentlemen, Eric Clapton.
On lead vocals and guitar, Bobby Whitlock on keys, co-lead and backing vocals. He also sings lead on Thorn Tree in the Garden. Carl Radel on bass, Jim Gordon on drums and tabla, with a very special guest from Macon, Georgia's own Allman Brothers Band, Duane Allman, contributing slide guitar to 11 of the 14 songs. Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs was produced by the one, the only Tom Dowd with the Dominos. Roll transition. I feel like a fucking Muppet. A lime green feather boa. This is something Kim Gordon would wear. God, I wish I was as cool as Kim Gordon. God, I think I just wish I was cool enough to bag Thurston Moore. So, how did we get here? How did we get to Eric Clapton blowing up his entire life for his best friend's wife? This chapter of the video will be spent introducing all the major players in today's story. Main characters Eric Clapton, George Harrison, and Pattie Boyd, and supporting characters Delaney and Bonnie, Bobby Whitlock, Tom Dowd, and Duane Allman. There will be some dashing back and forth, some flashbacks and flash forwards, but this chapter of the video will get everybody to roughly the same time frame, the spring of 1970. It may seem convoluted, it did to me at times while I was writing, but you'll find all these guys' stories are much more interconnected than you ever thought. To understand how Eric got himself in this situation in the first place, we have to go all the way back to 1968. My favorite year in rock music. It produced my favorite Cream record, my favorite Hendrix record, my favorite Beatles record, and favorite Kinks record on the same day. My favorite live album recorded in 68. And would you believe me if I told you it was the year a review written by some rando American college kid broke up one of the biggest groups of the 1960s? Because that is literally what happened. In March, Cream played a gig at Brandeis University. A student there, one John Landau, wrote a particularly scathing review. It works its way all the way up to Rolling Stone magazine. Cream had a feature written by Jan Wenner running in that very same issue. Eric has always been buddy-buddy with Rolling Stone. They're his favorite music magazine, so he was psyched for his first feature. He picked up a copy of this issue to read the Wenner piece, flips it to Landau's review, and this is what he saw. It called Eric unoriginal, trapped by cliches, quote, vast creative potential but none fulfilled. Quips like, quote, repetition and, quote, terribly boring. In the closing lines, quote, when Cream gets over their virtuosity hang-up, which is what I think their kind of virtuosity is, we may really see something. As the story goes, this triggered a full-on existential crisis for Eric. To add insult to injury, Jan Wenner reviewed the next Cream record, Wheels of Fire, in another issue of Rolling Stone and trashed it. The opening line says it all, quote, Cream is good at a number of things. Unfortunately, songwriting and recording are not among them. At this time, Bob Dylan's old backing band, The Band, dropped their first album, Music from Big Pink, and it blew everyone's socks off, including Eric. He got it in his head that country rock was the future of rock and roll, and that's where he was gonna go. On July 10th, 1968, before Wheels of Fire was even out in the UK, Eric breaks up Cream. So you'd think he'd form a country influence group after this, right? Wrong! He links up with Steve Winwood of Traffic, Rick Gretsch of Family, Ginger Baker crashes the party, and all four get a little sidetracked by this amorphous thing called blind faith. The closest thing to country on this thing is the fiddle on Sea of Joy. But once again, Eric is unhappy. He isn't feeling this whole supergroup thing and was never crazy about being a front man. He never had any intention of fronting Cream in the first place. Atlantic Records exec Ahmet Erdogan shoved him into that role during Disraeli Gears sessions. Eric said to Rolling Stone in 1985, quote, there was a lack of direction in Blind Faith. I was uncomfortable. I started looking for somewhere else to go. Delaney and Bonnie were a godsend. A side note, I can't cross-reference this interview this time because it's not in Rolling Stone's database. For some reason, I tried looking for the issue in question on eBay, but Clapton was featured in Rolling Stone 3 times in 1985 alone. I wasn't kidding when I said Rolling Stone has always loved him. So in August of 1969, before Blind Faith's album is even out, Eric blows up the band again. He jumps ship for the opening act of their tours, honest-to-goodness country rockers Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. At this time, their rhythm section consisted of Bobby Whitlock, Whitlock on keys, Carl Radel on bass, and Jim Keltner on drums. They also boasted Dave Mason of Traffic on guitar. Delaney and Bonnie were in some label trouble right now. After their first record on Stax failed, they bounced to Elektra, then attempted to jump ship to Apple Records. Neither of those worked because Yeah, that wasn't even the most insane thing Delaney Bramlett did. He's like a white James Brown. How were they in line for Apple in the first place? Because who jumped on stage with them a couple times during that last tour but George Harrison? Eric and George first met when the Yardbirds opened for the Beatles' holiday concerts at the Odeon. Yes, this lore goes all the way back to the Yardbirds days. They grew closer through 1966. Also in 66, George marries top model Pattie Boyd. They met on set of A Hard Day's Night and quickly became one of the it couples of the back half of the decade. George and Eric were certified besties by White Album production in 68, see While My Guitar Gently Weeps. George also wrote one of the Beatles' signature songs, In Eric's Garden. And 1969 was a turbulent year for George, kicked off with the ill-fated Get Back sessions. Everyone knows about I'm Leaving the Band Now and the origins of Wah Wah, but not everyone knows just why George was so pissy during those sessions. It wasn't just because he was fed up with the John and Paul show, though he was thoroughly fed up with the John and Paul show. He'd been playing with them since he was 14. It was because he got caught red-handed cheating on his wife with a, quote, French woman who'd moved into their home. Hold on to your hats, folks. The woman in question, allegedly, Eric's ex-girlfriend, Charlotte Martin. As the story goes, the songs like I Dig Love, Hear Me Lord, and, oh god, I'll put it here. I just can't think of the title. It's been a minute. I can feel it. Let it down! All of those were about his little tryst with Charlotte. In response to her husband's infidelity, Pattie moved out of Kinfauns for a time. This infidelity set two important precedents moving forward. Number one, bro code was out the window. George and Eric could have their hands in each other's proverbial cookie jars. And number two, it put George and Pattie's marriage in serious jeopardy. 1969 brought the Harrisons hurdle after hurdle, the drug bust in March, the slow, painful breakup of the Beatles, George's mother's failing health. Not to mention, in early 1970, they bought Friar Park from a nunnery. Moving is one of the most stressful things you can do besides divorce, and wouldn't you know it, both happened in this story. On top of all that, George and Pattie were struggling to conceive. They both so desperately wanted children, so the fertility struggles were equal parts frustrating and sad. To escape the stress, George threw himself headfirst into the whole Hare Krishna thing. He starts inviting all of these Hare Krishnas and other guests to live in Friar Park, and they totally take over the place. See the Hare Krishnas in Get Back. This drove Pattie nuts. They were all over her house, chanting in her dining room. They weren't watching their kids. The kids nearly drowned in the pond more than once. This really rubbed Pattie the wrong way. Since she was 25, 26 years old by now, her modeling career was effectively done. Her home was her refuge, the only thing she could pour her energy into anymore. Normally, she would have just talked to George about how she was feeling, but the spectacular breach of trust between them meant that communication completely broke down, leaving Chris O'Dell and Terry Doran as their messengers. All this left the door wide open for our dashing, handsome Prince Eric Clapton. Wait, no, I take that back, actually. Our problematic fave, Eric Clapton, to swoop in on the girl. Pattie first met Eric at the after party for Cream's gig at the Seville. This must have been the July 2nd, 1967 show if Brian Epstein was still alive. Quote, "He was incredibly exciting to watch. I was in a box next to Tony King, who worked for the Beatles, and he kept saying, 'Oh my God.' He looked wonderful on stage, very sexy, and played so beautifully. But he didn't act like a rock star when they met. He was surprisingly shy, and Pattie found that sweet. At that time, he was still dating Charlotte Martin, but he made it very clear he had his mind set on Pattie. He would sit next to her at events, compliment her outfits, her cooking, pay special attention to her in group settings, and went out of his way to make her laugh. Quote, "Those were all things that George no longer did." Basically, Eric was her shoulder to cry on. They flirted like this, on and off, pretty harmlessly, throughout 1969. At this time, Eric went off to record his first solo album, which I know I have, I'm just too lazy to dig it out right now. Produced by Delaney Bramlett, it included many of the Friends. They can be heard on After Midnight, which was Eric's first solo hit. After their potential deal with Apple fell through in spectacular fashion, Eric managed to get Delaney and Bonnie a deal with Atco, his US album distributor. They released Delaney and Bonnie's third studio album, To Bonnie from Delaney, with one Tom Dowd in the producer's chair. Now, Tom Dowd's resume is, for lack of a better term, fucking ridiculous. Otis Redding, Aretha, the original Oye Como Va, Giant Steps, Bags and Train, Mingus, oh yeah! Not to mention, he built one of the first 8-track machines in the United States, if not the first. He for sure built Atlantic Records first, and he built Ray Charles's console out in LA. Tom met Eric through Disraeli Gears sessions back in '67. They worked together on Wheels of Fire and Live Cream. Criteria Studio in Miami was where most of Atlantic Records' late '60s soul material was cut. Tom moved to Miami to handle the workflow. Criteria was where Tom worked with Delaney and Bonnie. It's reflective of Atlantic's focus shifting. Jerry Wexler said, quote, "Around the start of the '70s, the music that caught me was swamp. Everywhere I looked, everywhere I traveled, I saw evidence of this new and old amalgamation of sounds. It was all the Southern sound, R&B played by Southern whites. It was country funk. It was in the soil, the grits, the field lore, the drinking water, the sure-footed rhythm, the plain, earthy talk. Out of all these ingredients issued the clarity, the mess, and the majesty of the deep down Southern swamp. Nowadays, we might call that Southern rock." Tom's caught the Southern rock bug too, and gets in good with Capricorn Records. More on this later, but this impending Southern rock boom is looking pretty good for Delaney and Bonnie. Far and away, the premier oral historian of Derek and the Dominos formation and the eventual Layla sessions is Delaney and Bonnie and Friends keyboardist Bobby Whitlock. That being said, you have to take everything he says with a grain of salt. There are at least 3 different stories of how the Dominos met Duane Allman, and 2 of them come from Bobby. He also once said Duane only played on 2 songs on the record, which is very easily provably false. And a lot of Bobby's quotes will be abbreviated in some way because boy can he talk. In early 1970, Delaney and Bonnie and Friends got all caught up in the Mad Dogs and Englishmen nonsense. There was a whole lot of contractual shit that made this tour happen. Most of the Friends, including Carl Radel, basically joined the crew as a favor to Joe Cocker. Bobby stayed back with Delaney and Bonnie, and he was not happy about it. They, mostly Delaney, were driving him crazy. He was super difficult to work with, and he terrorized Bonnie. Bobby confides in Steve Cropper that he wants out, and seeks refuge with a friend he made on the last tour, Eric Clapton. Bobby arrives at Herdwood Edge in the spring of 1970. Eric confided in him, telling him his deepest, darkest secret that he was madly in love with his best friend's wife. He'd just sent her a pretty ballsy letter addressed to, quote, "Dearest L." And Pattie had no idea it was from him at first. Quote, "It made the flirtation all the more exciting and dangerous. but as far as I was concerned, it was just flirtation. You may have noticed Eric speaking in code, addressing Pattie as L. This is because a mutual friend gave Eric a copy of Nizami Ganjavi's The Story of Layla and Majnun. Quote, Clapton was speared to the core by the obscurely metaphoric romantic tale, likening himself to Majnun, the madman poet, and Pattie to the beautiful, unobtainable Princess Layla. The song I Am Yours was adapted from a passage of Layla and Majnun. Of course I have a copy. Quote, and if in your wanderings you should pass Layla's tent, Majnun says to a stag on his endless journey through the desert, quote, I am yours, however distant you may be. Your sorrow, when you grieve, brings grief to me. There blows no wind, but wafts your scent to me. There sings no bird, but calls your name to me. Each memory that has left its trace with me lingers forever, as if part of me. This juicy secret was more than enough inspiration for Eric and Bobby. They immediately get to writing. This is what Bobby had to say about writing with Eric. Quote, songs just evolved like they did with Isaac Hayes and David Porter. We weren't writing to have great songs. We wrote just to have something to play. Later, quote, we would play literally for 3 days without stopping. Winter sports. Eric had this 5x3x4 chest of all blues records. Robert Johnson, Bill Brunzi, Skip James, Muddy Waters, Ray Charles, Bessie Smith, Buddy Guy, Freddie King, Otis Rush, obscure no one's heard of. And he could tell you everybody who played on every single record, not unlike yours truly, but I have the internet to help me. Eric didn't. He was just a walking white Rolodex of the blues. It inspired Bobby to tap into his own roots. Booker T, Memphis Slim, Jerry Lee Lewis. He brought Sam and Dave into the mix too. Delaney had taught Eric how to sing, and Bobby sang the high stuff, quote, like a chick, with Delaney and Bonnie. Eric and Bobby quickly modeled their style after Sam and Dave's. One night, Bobby was awake by himself, musing on the song Tell the Truth, recorded by Otis Redding and Ray Charles. Bobby was a big R&B guy. Quote, I was thinking about the whole world's shaking, can't you feel it? I was a young man gaining experience and getting older. That's what I was thinking about. The new dawn is breaking now, can't you see it? Came from, wouldn't you know it, staying up all night. Bobby wrote in the living room, singing at the top of his lungs. What was above him but Eric's bedroom? He staggers down the stairs the next morning like an exhausted dad on Christmas morning, ratty robe and all, and says, I got your last verse. Mad Dogs and Englishmen is over by now. Jim Keltner is invited to Hurtwood Edge with Carl Radel to jam with Bobby and Eric. But Keltner declined. Carl instead brought Wrecking Crew and Mad Dogs and Englishmen alum Jim Gordon. There were no gigs, there was no game plan, it was just Eric, Bobby, Carl, and Jim getting stoned and lying around like bums. Now, George Harrison had a producer on deck for his first honest-to-goodness solo record, but he didn't have a band. He calls Eric up asking for the guys, he agrees on one condition: Phil records their single. The promise held up, and in June of 1970, they cut the original version of Tell the Truth. All Things Must Pass production solidified these guys as a group. All this time spent with George, and therefore Pattie, also solidified Eric's obsession with her. From a very famous letter he wrote to her, quote, Dear Layla, for nothing more than the pleasures past, I would sacrifice my family, my God, and my own existence, and still you will not move. I am at the end of my mind. I cannot go back, and there is nothing in tomorrow, save you, that can attract me beyond today. I have listened to the wind, I have watched the dark brooding clouds, I have felt the earth beneath me for a sign, a gesture, but there is only silence. Why do you hesitate? Am I a poor lover? Am I ugly? Am I too weak? Too strong? Do you know why? If you want me, take me. I am yours. If you don't want me, please break the spell that binds me. To cage a wild animal is a sin. To tame him is divine. My love is yours. Aww. When All Things Must Pass wrapped, Eric and company set their sights on gigging. Their debut would be a charity gig at the Lyceum on the night of June 14th, 1970. But there's just one problem. Quote, in the excitement of forming the group, one thing had slipped our minds. Right up to the last minute before we were to go on stage, we had no name. Eric suggests Del and the Dominos. MC Tony Ashton hops on the mic, messes up, accidentally smooshes Del and Eric together, and ladies and gentlemen, Derek and the Dominos. The inflection point of Eric's star-crossed love came the next month, surrounding O Calcutta's opening night in London. George was off doing whatever, so Pattie attended the premiere with a friend who appeared but Eric. After the show, she went to a party with him. Quote, much later in the evening, George appeared. He kept asking, where's Pattie? But no one seemed to know. He was about to leave when he spotted me in the garden with Eric. Woo! He came over to us and said, what's going on? To my complete horror, Eric said, I have to tell you, man, I'm in love with your wife. I wanted to die. George was furious. He turned to me and said, well, are you going with him or coming with me? Pattie went home with George that night. I maintain the belief that this is the night any day is about. Meanwhile, back in America, Tom Dowd crossed paths with a scrappy group of dudes out of Macon, Georgia. The Allman Brothers Band. They're working on Idlewild South right now, a record I always think I have, but somehow don't. When Tom gets a call from Eric, he's ready to cut a record with the Dominos, and he wants Tom in the producer's chair. The Allman Brothers' leader at the time was 23-year-old Duane Allman. His resume was also fucking ridiculous. He was a solid session guitarist, Aretha Franklin, The Wait, Clarence Carter, The Road of Love. I like what I'm listening to right now. And, of fucking course, Delaney and Bonnie. Nothing could have prepared me for how incestuous this story is. Of note was Duane's work for Wilson Pickett's recording, Hey Jude. I happen to have this single thanks to a viewer from way back. Just listen to Duane rip on this thing. When Tom hangs up the phone saying he's booked for the next Eric Clapton project, Duane fanboys pretty hard. But nothing comes out of it just yet. The Allman Brothers never recorded anything in one shot. They were perhaps the busiest band in America, playing over 300 gigs in 1970 alone. Sessions were naturally interrupted so they could gig. Back across the pond, the newly christened Derek and the Dominos summer tour opened at the Village Blues Club in Dagenham, Essex, not exactly the Lyceum, and ended at the Van Dyke Club in Plymouth. It included that ill-fated festival in the south of France where, oh my god, I have so many albums right here, where they discovered what would be the Layla art. In late August of 1970, the Dominos finally arrive in Miami to record. Their equipment situation was total whiplash for Tom. Clapton went from Marshall double stacks to a dinky little Fender Champ and a small battery-powered pig nose propped up by two beach chairs. Quote, if you walked into the room and sneezed, you made more noise than they were making. But I guess it worked out because soundproofing at Criteria was little more than egg cartons stapled to the walls. Cheap but effective, as the studio was still pretty green. Bobby says the Dominos were only the second act to record there after James Brown. This is definitely not true. Eric brought in Brownie, the tobacco sunburst body of a 1956 Strat. The first couple of days of sessions are aimless until Duane calls Tom, inviting him to the Allman Brothers gig at the Beach Convention Center. Tom hangs up the phone. Eric asks who called. It was Duane. Eric's like, Duane Allman? The guy who played on Wilson Pickett, Hey Jude, Duane Allman, and totally fanboys. And you mean to tell me his band is playing tonight, Tom? Tom, we have to go. They had to sneak Eric and company into the convention center, smooshing them between the barricade and the risers. Tom recalls, quote, "They got us in by the side of the stage and we crawled in on our hands and knees so we wouldn't obscure the stage and propped ourselves against these sandbags, sitting on our butts, looking up with our hands holding our knees together. Duane soloing, doing his thing with his eyes closed and his mouth open, opens his eyes, sees Eric, and freezes. Dickie Betts takes over, thinking Duane broke a string or something, goes to check it out after a bit, also sees Eric Clapton, and also freezes. Eric was equally in awe of Duane. Quote, "He was very tall and thin, with an air of complete conviction, and although he didn't sing, I felt sure he was the leader of the band just by his body language." Everyone piled into, quote, cars and Winnebagos and whatever the hell, to jam at Criteria that night for 15 hours straight. Tom says he went through 2 or 3 sets of engineers. After 2 years of swirling, chaotic energy, one night lit the fuse. Eric had the motive, something to prove after a series of weird career moves. He had the source material, Layla and Majnun, and the muse, the forbidden love Pattie Boyd. He had the songs, he had the producer, thanks to Delaney and Bonnie, he had the band, and finally, he had the catalyst. Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs was born. Can you believe it took that long to catch up to where we usually kick off a Vinyl Monday? I mean, my God. One quick thing before the studio nitty-gritty. The Layla title had already been decided before recording began. The "and other assorted love songs" suffix came from Eric's notorious sweet tooth. He was hanging with Bobby in his hotel room and they were eating from a box of chocolate all sorts. The hotel in question was the Thunderbird Motel. Quote, "It sure was not a 5-star place. Pink flamingos and a flashing neon sign. Very 1970s Florida, kind of a shithole, but hey, at least it was on the beach." The relaxed tropical vibe, coupled with the exotic source material, influenced the sound a fair bit. The breezy feel of I Am Yours and Tabla on Bell Bottom Blues. Speaking of Bell Bottom Blues, that song was written about a pair of jeans Eric brought back from Miami for Pattie. Going into recording, the guys didn't have enough material for a single LP, let alone a double. So this chapter of the video should give you an idea of just how explosively creative Layla sessions were. The bulk of Layla was recorded in just 10 days in the studio. August 26th, 27th, and 28th, August 30th and 31st, September 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and September 9th and 10th. The guys were working against the clock. They only had Duane until the 3rd. The Allman Brothers were playing gigs in Milwaukee on the 4th and Des Moines on the 6th. Bobby claims the running order of this album is the order in which every song was created. As you will see, this is just not true. Still, going from not enough material for a single album to a double album in just 10 days is insane. How were they moving so fast? Winter sports, of course. And heroin and plenty of Johnny Walker. Tom was appalled by all the shit lying around his studio. Remember, this is Duane Allman and Eric Clapton in 1970. When Ahmet Erdogan dropped by Criteria to supervise, he pulled Eric aside and scolded his golden boy. Considering all the substances floating around, the atmosphere at Criteria was quite no nonsense. The guys had a hard deadline, there was not much room for screwing around or other studio banter. Bobby said, quote, "We were there to take care of business. We cooled our heels at the hotel, but when we got to the studio, it was focus time. We were there to play, not to party." The first album track cut was Dowd's Tell the Truth. Spectres would be released in September. It was almost immediately recalled. It just didn't reflect the Dominoes sound anymore. What was the Dominoes sound? According to Bobby, quote, "The basic concept was that we didn't want any horns, we didn't want no chicks. We wanted a rock and roll band. They quickly settled into a southern rock and country-twinged brand of blues rock with a dash of soul. And Tom Dowd knows soul. He recorded all the greats. In fact, he recorded the original It's Too Late. Carl was super into Chuck Willis, so they dug out a bunch of Chuck from the archives. That's how It's Too Late made it onto the record. Tom was also very old school. On day one, he handed everyone chord sheets. Bobby turns to Eric all like, man, what the hell are these? What the hell is this? Tom was used to being very involved with all of his acts musically. See him suggesting the cowboy movie beat for Sunshine of Your Love.
There just wasn't this common ground like they had on so many of the other songs. And I was listening to what they were playing, and I said, you know, have you ever seen any American westerns, the Indian beat, where the downbeat is the beat? It's dunk, 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 dunk.
But this group of guys was having none of it. If the guys learned anything from Phil Spector, it was to always keep the tapes running, and with just one notable exception, that's what they did. That notable exception came on day 2, August 30th. Sam the Sham was in the studio the same time as the guys. I believe he was in Studio A while the Dominos were in Studio B. Despite orders to keep the tapes running, one of the engineers fucked up. Tom hears the guys breaking into Key to the Highway from the bathroom and comes running out shouting, "Turn up the faders! Turn up the faders! Hit the goddamn machine!" And that's why it's the only song on the album that begins with a fade-in. August 31st brought Nobody Knows You and Why Does Love Gotta Be So Sad, both one-take wonders, both totally live. Keep On Growin' came the very next day, September 1st. Keep On Growin' was nearly canned as nobody could think of any lyrics. But Bobby asked for 20 minutes in the Criteria lobby and a pad of paper to write. According to him, Eric did those 3 overdubs without hearing them together. All he had played back was the core track. He just knew what he'd put down and went off the vague idea in his head of what it would sound like. Quote, "I thought that was akin to watching Rembrandt," or Michelangelo. Bobby likes to change the artist depending on the source. September 2nd was a very busy day. I Looked Away, Bell Bottom Blues, Have You Ever Loved a Woman? September 3rd, Duane's last day, was I Am Yours, Any Day, It's Too Late, and whatever overdub he needed to do. At some point in the chaos, Robert Palmer dropped by Criteria, and this is what he saw. Quote, "When I showed up, everyone was just spread out on the carpet, nodded out. Then Eric appeared in the doorway in an old brown leather jacket with his hair slicked back like a greaser's, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Emphasis on the grease. I don't think he'd washed in days either. He surveyed the damage, took a beat, then referenced the fucking Casabianca, monologuing to no one in particular. The boys stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled." And he looks up, turns around, and leaves. Bobby didn't know Little Wing before recording it. He had to have a lyrics sheet at the organ, and listening to it, you can kind of tell. Just 9 days after the Dominos cut their version, Jimi Hendrix died. What was supposed to be a cute little nod and a wink to an associate stayed on the track listing as a tribute. Now, you might have noticed I haven't mentioned the title track at all until about now, and that's for a very good reason. The question of the title track wasn't fully answered for about a month. It evolved from a slow driving blues jam with a little help from Duane. He had modeled a lick after the opening line of Albert King's As the Years Go Passing By.
There is nothing I can do.
Speed that up a little bit.
There is nothing I can do.
Push it a little sharp.
There is nothing I can do.
And yes! There it is! Fucking genius! So, it's no secret that Duane had a habit of just slightly overshooting notes and playing stuff viciously sharp, but in this case, it was a blessing in disguise. Because when that second half of the song came along in late September, quote, "We had to go back and get as close as we could to the original mix up to the point they liked, then figure out how to cut in this other part. I think we wired 2 or 3 tapes together to get the transition the way it was supposed to go, then readjust the front end end to fit the back end. So when they very speeded everything to match, Duane was suddenly in key. As for what key that is, I don't know. Nobody fucking knows. Not even Tom Dowd knew. It's in the key of Layla! The commonly accepted Layla session's end date is October 1st. There is no way that's correct. The Dominoes were already back out touring by then, playing Swindon Town Hall that night. It's much more possible they flew into Miami from September 26th to 28th to wrap things up. Just the first is way too quick of a turnaround time. This isn't the only date discrepancy in the Layla canon. We'll get to the big one very soon. As for the Coda, don't you worry. We'll get to the Coda. On the last day of recording, Tom did some quick math and found the guys needed just under 3 minutes of music to round out a double album. Eric, who'd heard Bobby play Thorn Tree in the Garden all of once before, asked him if they could record it. Bobby swears up and down they all played around the same mic and it was the only one in the room. Once again, I'm calling bullshit, but that orange acoustic in the Polaroids? Eric gave it to Bobby as a thank you gift. When all was said and done, the track listing of Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have I Looked Away, followed by Bell Bottom Blues. Then Keep On Growing, and rounding out side 1 is Jimmy Cox's Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. Opening up side 2 is I Am Yours, followed by Any Day, and rounding out disc 1 is Big Bill Broonzy's Key to the Highway. Opening up disc 2, we have Tell the Truth, followed by Why Does Love Gotta Be So Sad, and rounding out side 3 is Billy Miles's Have You Ever Loved a Woman? Opening up side 4, we have Jimi Hendrix's Little Wing, then Chuck Willis's It's Too Late, next Layla, and the album closes with Thorn Tree in the Garden. Quote, whatever befalls us has its meaning, though it is often hard to grasp. In the book of life, every page has 2 sides. On the upper one, we inscribe our plans, dreams, and hopes. The reverse is filled by Providence, whose verdicts rarely match our desire. Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, the one and only studio LP by Derek and the Dominos, was released December 6th, 1970. Wait, what? Every other common man resource has Layla's birthday on November 9th, but according to several sources I found, that's wrong. According to Eric in that 1985 interview with Rolling Stone, Derek and the Dominos' fall tour was meant to build hype before Layla's release, not promote it after the fact. That tour concluded on December 6th, according to Eric, the day Layla was released. In my time doing this series, I've seen lots of quick turnarounds between the final mix and the release, but none this quick for a double album. Even on rush order, Layla would have needed at least a month to get everything pressed and all the packaging in order. My guess was the final mix was handed in October, manufacturing and acetates and all that nonsense took place through November, release in December. On November 5th, 1970, the Dominos appear on the Johnny Cash Show with this big, doofy Union Jack backdrop. And Eric looks... No. Johnny goes to introduce the guys, all ladies and gentlemen from London, England. Bobby's hand shot up like a schoolboy, and he starts listing off where everybody is from. I'm from Memphis, and he's from Tulsa, and he's from Hollywood, and my family's in the front row. Hi! The director shouts, oh God, cut! And I imagine tells Bobby to shut the fuck up. The guys played It's Too Late and a tune from the would-be second album, Got to Get Better in a Little While. They joined Johnny and Carl Perkins for Matchbox and Blues Power. Upon release, Layla had to compete with 3 other Dominoes-related projects. Mad Dogs and Englishmen was released back in August. Clapton's own solo record, which finally came out in September of 1970, and most recently, All Things Must Pass in November. Clapton's Love Rivals album soared. As for Layla, it failed. Quote, I wasn't prepared to do any press or help it in any way. I was still a real idealist in those days, and my hope was that the album would sell on its merit. It didn't, of course, because lack of promotion meant that nobody knew it was out there. Bobby said, quote, We were disappointed, but not surprised. When we were on tour, our record was behind us everywhere we went. There was no product for the band to promote, and not everyone knew who we were. We were ahead of our record, and ahead of our time. Tom Dowd just couldn't wrap his head around Layla's failure either. Quote, I felt it was the best goddamn album I'd been involved with since the genius of Ray Charles. And Neshwi and Ahmet Erdogan and Jerry Wexler were absolutely enamored of the album, but they couldn't get the goddamn thing on the air. They just couldn't get a viable single out of it. You see, Layla was cut down to 2 minutes and change for the single. It needed that coda to work. Without it, it was just another rock song. The emotional gravity was lost. However, those who heard Layla in full understood its power, like early purveyor Mike Nesmith, who covered I Looked Away on Nevada Fighter and asked radio stations to give his airtime to Layla. Eric didn't get the girl either. In an interview with Rolling Stone to promote 461 Ocean Boulevard, quote, before this album, the only thing that meant anything to me was Layla, which was because it was actually about an emotional experience. A woman that I felt really deeply about and who turned me down, and I kind of had to pour it out in some way. So Bobby and I wrote these songs, made an album, and the whole thing was great. What did the woman in question think? Jan Wenner asks. Eric replies bluntly, quote, she didn't give a damn. So that's not entirely true. Pattie was used to having wonderful songs written about her. See, I Need You, It's All Too Much, Something, For You Blue. But when Eric played Layla for her the first time, she was floored. She thought it, quote, the most powerful, moving song she ever heard. But sometime later, Eric turned up to Friar Park while George was away. He starts ranting and raving, saying he's so desperately in love, and Pattie has to leave George right now. Pattie is like, Eric, are you crazy? I'm married to George. I love George. Quote, at this point, he produced a small packet of heroin from his pocket and held it out towards me. Well, if you're not going to come away with me, I'm going to take this. Pattie tries to take it from him. He leaves. Quote, I hardly saw him for 3 years. He did as he had threatened. She wouldn't see him again until the ill-fated concert for Bangladesh in August of 1971. By then, he was in a bad way, and it's safe to say things between all three of them were very awkward. Yeah, Layla just about destroyed the Harrisons' marriage. By then, Eric dove headfirst into heroin, taking one of his girlfriends, Alice Ormsby Gore, with him. I say one of his girlfriends because buckle up for this one, folks. Pattie wasn't the only Boyd Eric was messing with. Who was Eric's live-in girlfriend at the time of Layla's recording? It was Pattie's 17-year-old sister, Paula. The minute she heard Layla, she knew it was about her sister. Quote, she'd always had a nagging suspicion that he was only with her because she was the next best thing to me. When she heard Layla, she packed her bags and took her broken heart home. She actually lived with Bobby for a while before marrying producer Andy Johns. None of this was helped by the embattled sessions for the Dominoes' second album in May of 1971. Everyone was just way too loaded on everything to get anything done. They only managed to eke out a handful of tunes before they gave up. Eric said, quote, I remember to this day being in my house feeling totally lost and hearing Bobby Whitlock pull up in the driveway outside and scream for me to come out. He sat in his car outside all day, and I hid. Eric was also really holding out for Duane to rejoin, but it just wasn't gonna happen. He was married to the Allman Brothers Band. Andy Johns was producer of these sessions, but the Dominoes refused to give up control. Andy had to leave the project to fulfill his next contractual obligation, exile on Maine. The final blow came on October 29th, 1971. Duane Allman died in a motorcycle accident just outside of Macon, Georgia. He was just 24 years old. Upon hearing the news, Eric pulled the plug on the Dominoes. There was no Dominoes without Duane. For the next several years, Eric stewed in his self-imposed exile. But then something funny happened. 2 compilations released within a year, the Memorial album, Duane Allman Anthology, and The History of Eric Clapton. Both had Layla in full, and it did the trick. Suddenly, it was the national anthem. Finally, after 2 years, Layla was a hit. Okay, so about that coda. There are 2 or 3 versions of this story. According to the first, during Layla's sessions, Jim Gordon attempted to record for a solo album on Eric's dime. Jim's futzing with this thing on piano, Eric catches him, and Jim bartered this piano part away in lieu of having to pay Eric back. Now, fellow Mad Dogs and Englishmen alum Rita Coolidge, who was dating Jim at the time of the tour, says this, quote, "Jim and I were on the way to England to record with Eric. I believe this would have been for the self-titled record. Quote, the day we were in the studio with Eric, I sat down at the piano and played it and sang. Eric seemed to like it, so I gave him a cassette and left it on the piano. Everybody in Delaney and Bonnie were there. Bobby Whitlock, Carl Radel, the whole band who was there witnessed it. Bobby corroborates this story. I actually believe him this time. When Rita heard Layla, she instantly clocked the coda melody as being from her song Time. To add insult to injury, she discovered she wasn't given writing credit. She initially wanted to take legal action against Eric, approaching producer David Anderley for help, but he told her it was no use. To get to Eric, she'd have to go through Robert Stigwood, and he said, quote, "What are you gonna do? You're a girl. You don't have the money to fight this." He was right. Lawyers were generally unwilling to represent lone women against powerful men back then. Rita could win her case and maybe get royalties, but if she lost, she'd quite literally be paying for it for the rest of her life. So she walked away. The coda famously appeared in Goodfellas. To capitalize on Layla's, quote, Lazarus act, Derek and the Dominos Live was slammed together in 1973, and several songs from Layla are staples in Eric's set to this day. Nobody Knows You, Key to the Highway, but especially the title track. He's played it at all his most famous gigs, his comeback at the Rainbow, Live Aid, MTV Unplugged. You know, the best-selling live album ever. That acoustic version finally snagged Layla a Grammy in fucking 1992. In this time frame between Layla's initial release and that win, Eric had gotten and lost the girl. I gotta say, it is pretty romantic that sometime after George and Pattie's divorce, Eric finally won her over. He wrote Wonderful Tonight for her, but it wasn't happily ever after. As much as I love George Harrison, he wasn't a saint, but Eric was unequivocally worse. He treated Pattie like shit. He admitted to it openly in an interview in the 90s. Pattie only corroborated it in her book. The only positive I can really scrape up from this is that all 3 parties had a sense of humor about the whole Layla thing. George and Eric jokingly called each other husbands-in-law. Pattie and George remained friends until he passed. As for Eric, she and him are civil. We know what happened to the love. What about the guitars? Before his passing, Duane lost his gold top to good old-fashioned guitar lust. He swapped it for a Sunburst Les Paul. It turned up some years later. Duane's guitar heir apparent Derek Trucks has played it. It sold for $1.25 million in 2019, one of the most expensive guitars ever sold at auction. As for Brownie, it sold for a measly $500,000 in 1999. As for the painting, in a truly deranged move, Eric gave it to George when his divorce with Pattie was finalized as a replacement for the real Pattie. As a joke, George passed it off to Pattie once her divorce from Eric was finalized. Last March, she sold a number of Layla-related affects, including Eric's letters and the painting at auction. The painting's estimated price was between $52,000 and $78,000. It sold for $2.56 million. In the last year or so, public opinion on Pattie has really turned. I know I'm getting ahead of myself with this, but I think it's from the auction. People really need to put this into perspective, right? Pattie got nothing from either divorce, and she has no children. Who's gonna deal with all this stuff when she dies? Her sister's kids? That's not fair to them. Better they're cherished by fans. I don't know, man. For remaining civil with Eric after the bullshit he put her through, she's a greater woman than I. Layla is widely considered to be one of the best Clapton verse projects, up there with Cream. It's one of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time, though it's slipped from number 115 to number 226 since 2003. I have the print issue of the 2003 list, the same year VH1 ranked it as the 83rd greatest album of all time. Here's what that had to say. Quote, "The panoramic anguish of Eric Clapton's singing and guitar playing here, in such songs as Why Does Love Gotta Be So Sad and the searing title track, was the product of very private hurt. Layla is also a double album feast of dueling guitars as Clapton soared in tandem with session guitarist and slide virtuoso Duane Allman. They had not met prior to the sessions, but their interplay in Key to the Highway and Have You Ever Loved a Woman is both harmonious and fiercely competitive. Electric brotherly love. So, what do I think of Layla? Going in. Holy shit, dude. I had one opportunity to do the funniest thing possible. How'd I do? Just now realizing I forgot to put my eyelashes on. Too late to fix that. I'll be doing this chapter of the video backwards, starting with the track-by-track breakdown and ending with my previous history with this album. Not a bad way to honor the original Layla video being the very first track-by-track breakdown on Vinyl Monday. This structure will make sense, I promise. What do I love about Layla? Number one, Eric's chemistry with Duane. Never again would Eric have this kind of chemistry with anyone, and I believe that comes from him playing with someone he truly respected. Number two, Eric's chemistry with Bobby. See the rationale from point one. Number three, the high emotional stakes. Never again would Eric play with this much passion and fire. Number four, the rhythm section of Bobby, Carl, and Jim. Eric said in his book this was the strongest rhythm section he ever played with. I don't know if they're necessarily comparable to Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, but the organ run through the Leslie cabinet alone is magic. And number five, Tom Dowd's warm, maximalist production. He took this yarn ball of sounds and made it make sense without trying to untangle it. That being said, Layla is famous amongst the audiophile crowd for sounding a bit muddy. For whatever reason, there's hella surface noise. The 20th anniversary CD edition attempted to rectify this by pushing the bass to the middle of the mix. The best sounding one is probably the Abbey Road Half-Speed Master. And I agree, it has nice body, it fills the room well. I know this take will get the audiophiles sharpening their pitchforks, nothing I haven't seen before. I really don't care for any attempt to make Layla sound better. It's like cleaning a painting too well and accidentally scrubbing away the face. The magic is in Layla's warmth and clutter. The two remixes, I can say, are necessary, solid improvements upon the original, are Layla 20's Key to the Highway and Keep on Growin'. Key to the Highway has so much more depth, the dynamics are here, it doesn't feel quite as stale, and Keep on Growin' simply added this. So much fun. Alright, on to the specifics. The moment you've all been waiting for, the songs. Over and over again, I say that an album's opening track can be its thesis statement. I first learned this principle from Layla opening with I Looked Away. It's all in the lyrics. Seemed a sin to love another man's woman. I guess I'll keep on sinning, Lord, loving her to my very last day. That's exactly what Majnun did with his Layla and what Eric is professing to his. We actually jump into this narrative at the end of the story with the woman running away and leaving him lonely. I like when breakup albums flip the timeline like this. A much more modern example is I never get to pull this album out. Tyler, the Creator's Igor. God, I remember when this record came out. Oh, gosh. This this would make one kick. And I still have the poster! I had this hanging on my apartment wall. Oh my gosh. Wow. It's like we're sitting down with this guy right after his love has left him, and he's telling us the story of how he got into all this mess. I Looked Away also sets the musical path that we'll be taking for the next 70 minutes. Southern twinged blues rock with a dash of soul. Our rhythm section forms a sturdy backbone for Eric and his multi-track guitars to clamber all over like a ladder, organ peeking through the rungs. Eric and Bobby are sharing the spotlight with their best white boy blues voices, delivered with conviction in the highest. Considering how long-winded Layla can get at times, a 3-minute poppier tune is best to settle us in. Bell Bottom Blues is one of Layla's crown jewels, an exotic and fully immersive turn. Eric lays the depths of his undying, unrequited love bare. If I could choose a place to die, it would be in your arms. With each chorus, he pleads for a second chance. The strain falsetto through the begging tugs at the heartstrings. It doesn't feel overblown or cheesy despite how dramatic the descending guitar is. There's something grounded about it. It's all wrong, but it's all right, the way that you treat me, baby. He's not just taking it on the chin, he's taking every kick to the ribs. Once I was strong, but I lost the fight. You won't find a better loser. Do you have any idea how whipped a man has to be to admit this utter lack of self-respect? He's accepting how much a fool this love makes him act. Almost. Don't you be surprised if you find me with another lover. Even with this grand profession, he still finds the space to remind his lover how replaceable she is. Maybe even with her own sister. I'm still not over that. It's one hell of a twist on the theme. Difficult as it can be to hold on to the rhythm section with all the stuff happening, all the wailing and melodrama. Bell Bottom Blues is a star moment for Jim Gordon. You wouldn't think tabla would fit into a record like this, but it somehow works. Again, an unexpected twist and a fun way to reference the Eastern source material, or George and Pattie's love of India. After how old school I Looked Away felt and the tissue soaker of Bell Bottom Blues, we need to have some fun. That's what Keep On Growin' is, a light-hearted, danceable, optimistic shuffle thanks to Bobby's positively infectious delivery over top. The lyrics are all youthful confidence, bordering on audacious. This song says, you may laugh now, but just you wait, I'll make you mine. Carl Radel is the underrated MVP of Layla, and Keep On Growin' might be his best moment on the record. He can go from country swing to Motown beat at the drop of a hat. At his best, he keeps the lengthier jams from feeling bland. Side 1 rounds out with the first cover song of 5 on Layla, Jimmy Cox's Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. It's also our first appearance by all-star guest Duane Allman. Slide guitar is a finicky thing. I've always considered the relationship between the player and the bottleneck to be somewhat symbiotic. If you're not careful, slide can sound fickle and sour and shitty. Duane makes it sound sweet here, soft trills mimicking the oohs of female backing vocalists on 50s and 60s soul records. Eric's generally got this muckier sound about him, while Duane could do such a wide range of things. He could mimic the sound of a harmonica, or a saxophone, or a woman crying. Here, he lilts between notes so effortlessly, it's like the guitar is an extension of his body. Nobody Knows You isn't quite so much reflective of the romantic situation happening on Layla, but it might be reflective of Clapton's diminished stature in the scene. His contemporaries were catching up to, if not surpassing him. It's hard for a man to cope when he's no longer God. It's also a nod to Layla's musical origins, soul and the blues. It's not my personal personal favorite moment of the record. I feel it drags the momentum down a bit, but it pays respect to the greats in the fabric of the blues tradition. Side 2 opens with one of the lightest and the most exotic song on the record, I Am Yours. It's tropical and feels free with tabla, shakers, and a breezy acoustic guitar. Like, the blues took a drink of exotica. It's also the sweetest song on the record. Eric almost croons his way through these lyrics, coming from the part of Majnun and Layla that I would most equate to Romeo and Juliet's balcony scene. Each memory that has left its trace with me lingers forever as a part of me. Those harmonies on I Am Yours, however distant you may be, are positively weird all these years later, and it's still hard for me to decipher exactly what is what, making this maybe the last enduring mystery of this album for me. I Am Yours is the purest Duane's guitar sounds, like he's mimicking steel guitar. He makes it sound like a swoon, sighing wistfully, as if a lady is responding to the sweet nothings whispered in her ear. Duane Allman, not my usual type, but if I were alive in 1970 and he played like this in front of me, I would have caved like a house of cards. This is the romance of Layla. Next is Any Day, a sprawling 6 minutes and change praising the highs and lows of love. This is one of those cases where I feel like the track length bogs it down. This isn't JJ Cale 2 minutes kind of blues. This is we're all sitting around with a case of beer blues. Pack your patience. As fabulous as Eric's turn is beginning 3 minutes in, the guys take a little long to get through their respective solos. Any Day's greatest strengths are its riff, memorable and strong, Jim's fiery drumming, he's showing off a full breadth of what he could do. Eric and Duane's feisty interplay, this gives you a sense of the fun they had together, and a special appearance by Bobby. My favorite verse in the song has always been his. Someday, baby, I know you're gonna need me. When this whole world has got you down, I'll be right here, so woman call me. One of my favorite moments on the record arrives with that bellowing, and I'll never let you. I also have to give a nod to Eric's verse. Break the glass and twist the knife into yourself. You gotta be a fool to understand. To bring your woman back home when she's left you for another, you gotta be a man. Ooh, shots fired in George's general direction! Then comes the longest song on the record, the second of our 5 covers, Key to the Highway. This point in the record is where you really have to exercise your patience. Every album has peaks and valleys. Layla is no different. Key to the Highway is a valley. Gene Santoro likened this to a, quote, 18-wheeler rumbling. I see it more like a little green Ford pickup. Everything about this has always felt sluggish to me. The pacing, Eric's delivery, the lyrics were perfectly intelligible when Big Bill Broonzy sang them. This is the point in the record where I get up to get another drink, find a light, roll up. But again, I understand why Key to the Highway is on the album. This pays homage to a key influence and Sam the Sham, and it's the band showing off their blues prowess. This is an Eric Clapton record after all. Thank God the guys re-recorded Tell the Truth. Spectre Tell the Truth is good, but Dowd Tell the Truth has this macho swagger. It's bossy, kind of sexy, with those little spurts in the beginning. Yeah. The guys have room for fun ad-libs and to saunter all over these lyrics. They really feel them as opposed to blowing right through them at breakneck speed. It gives Jim some space to ride the cymbal and throw in some unexpected drum fills, and Duane the space to tear up on a solo, showing off the grittier side of his sound. Trills, staccato taps, and delightfully earned tumbles down. Why Does Love Gotta Be So Sad is, I shit you not, the most coked out song I have ever heard in my entire life, and that's saying a lot. I reviewed Sly and the Family Stone this season. This is the other side of the Tell the Truth coin. What happens when you rush through a song? Sure, the mess and the chaos is fun. The sense of urgency through the solo is exciting. The joy to the world snuck in at the end is weird and funny, but it just feels like we're barreling through this. What is the rush? Maybe Eric doesn't want to us to pick up on how unhinged these lyrics are. You see what a fool you've made of me. I might have to break the law when I find you. Yes, I will! Stop running away. I've got a better game to play. You know I can't go on living without you. I'm sorry! Did he just threaten murder-suicide? The course of true love never did run smooth. But that's none of my business. Now, I know I've been pretty consistently hailing the highlights of this record so far, but the end of side 3 into side 4 is where Layla gets good. It's where the emotional stakes really amp up, and I'll do the best I can with my words to guide you through that journey. One of the most brilliant things about Layla is how well integrated some of these covers are. They feel so natural, you might not even know they're covers. That's absolutely the case with this one. Freddie King's Have You Ever Loved a Woman? It fits so well into the context of Layla that at first I didn't know it was a cover. Though it's a down-tempo number, it doesn't stop everyone from being on fire. This is Eric singing at its most soulful, each voice crack and ragged cry laying his soul bare. The call and response between man and guitar is so personified and natural, it's like they talk back. The solos are at their fiercest, the rhythm section just plowing this thing forward. This is the 18-wheeler. Eric Clapton lived this song, and you can tell. I'm just gonna say it outright. Side 4 of Layla is my favorite side of any double album ever. It's perfection. I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Kicking off the final side of Layla is one of my 2 favorite covers that happen to be back-to-back, Little Wing. What should have been a nod and a wink to an associate became a eulogy to a generational icon. The Dominos truly made Little Wing their own, altering the melody and crafting this beautiful arrangement. No sense in competing with Jimi Hendrix, so they just didn't. They completely reworked the song, but in a way that did Jimi justice. You can kind of tell Bobby didn't know the song before they recorded it. He is truly winging it on his vocal, but he puts everything he's got into it. Say It's All Right, Take Anything You Want From Me is sublime. There's a triumphant new riff, like the chariots arriving at the war for rock and roll's Helen of Troy. The solos reach such passionate heights they seem almost delirious, but I can't help but be swept up in it. It's so over-the-top dramatic, but it means everything it says. That's why it works. Then comes the cover of Chuck Willis's It's Too Late. It's total whiplash to come crashing down from the heights of Little Wing to this down-home country slow dance, but that's the kind of tonal valence that makes Layla exciting. I believe this is Eric and Bobby, the duo's best moment on the record. The call and response and harmony are so good that I sing Bobby's part instead. It's ironic that he's so obsessed with that whole no chicks thing with the Dominos, because I always appreciated the rugged yet androgynous flair he brought with his vocals. It adds an interesting facet to such a dude bro thing as blues rock. Again, this lament of lost love is so well integrated, I was shocked to learn it was a cover. I can imagine a heartbroken man drowning in whiskey and his own sorrow, dancing with himself where his beloved lady once stood. It's a weak man that cries, so I guess I better dry my eyes. Then there's this pause. A flitting piano, a buzzing amp, the drums putting the period on the end of this hour-long sentence. And then... God, what can I say about the title track that hasn't already been said? Every time I hear it, I am jolted alive, no matter how many times I listen to it, no matter how many times I use the lick as an audio joke in my videos. The electric life force that Layla possesses never dulls. The passion and mania never get old. Eric is singing his heart out to the degree at which he sounds like he's pulling his vocal cords apart. Even just thinking of hearing Duane's solo isolated for the very first time, thank you Tom Dowd and the Language of Music documentary for that, brings a tear to my eye.
That's Duane that we hear on the left.
I guess what I can say is the first movement of this song needs the second to survive. The second needs the first just as much. Tom was given all the tools, 16 tracks of shit to make into the cluttered, chaotic, messy, perfect, beautiful Layla that we hear today. And he assembled them into his masterpiece. Layla is just as much Tom Dowd's masterpiece as it is Eric Clapton's, or Duane Allman's, or Rita Coolidge's. I won't lie, the magic of the coda has been diminished by learning this part of the song was stolen from her one way or another. Insane timing, by the way. As of me filming this, Professor of Rock has just posted his own video on the Coda Thing. Despite the thievery, the magic of Layla still stands right up until that final bird call trill. Thank you, Bobby Whitlock, for Thorntree, the sorrowful but peaceful come down from the manic high, the most perfect closer there could ever be for this album. Thorntree authored my idea of a perfect breakup album closer, the tender acoustic send-off. All the best breakup albums have them. Blood on the Tracks has Buckets of Rain. Souvlaki has Dagger. Even Butterfly on goddamn Pinkerton. I love them all because I love Thorntree's place on Layla. Bobby's crushing tenderness is exactly what we need, a gentle acceptance. If I never see her face again, I never hold her hand, and if she's in somebody's arms, I still kind of wish the lyric had been, I think I'd understand, instead of I know, but there's no sense trying to meddle with the bird or the butterfly for fear of crushing its wing. Who am I to paint over Flaming June? The last line we hear, maybe someday soon, some way. The last glimmer of hope. What a delicate ending. What a perfectly orchestrated emotional arc over the past 70 minutes of music. Well done, boys. According to my camera roll, my first copy of Layla came barreling into my life on January 8th, 2019. She's seen better days, along with quite a few other albums. 300 to be exact. Those 300 records were once someone else's entire collection, and now they were the building blocks of mine. Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, The Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. I was promised the Beatles and Simon & Garfunkel and got neither. I lost that copy of Amboy Dukes almost immediately after. Its whereabouts have haunted me ever since. But as you can imagine, for the baby record collector I was then, for every artist or album I knew, there were 4 more that I didn't. My misadventures had very suddenly gained me hundreds of albums I'd never heard before, let alone seen, and I had to figure out what I was keeping. For example, I had never seen In the Court of the Crimson King before. I was in art school back then, and I kept In the Court of the Crimson King purely because I loved the art. Likewise, I had never seen or heard of Layla before, but I kept it because I loved the painting. The only way I was going to get familiar with my new collection was to listen to a different album every day, which I chose randomly. I still believe listening to one new thing every day is the best thing you could ever do to expand your music taste. I randomly chose Layla in March of that year. I was on my spring break from school, and holy fucking shit. Nothing could have prepared me for what jumped off my turntable that night. I didn't know guitars could make sounds like this. I didn't know an album could sound like that. I didn't know music could be infused with such passion and pain. I had no idea who Eric Clapton was back then, let alone Pattie Boyd. What I heard back then was Layla at its core, a man screaming from the rooftops over a woman he so desperately wanted but could not have. Do you want to see me crawl across the floor to you? Do you want to hear me beg you to take me back? Have you ever loved a woman so much you tremble in pain? To make the best of the situation before I finally go insane, please don't say we'll never find a way or tell me all my love's in vain. It was visceral and raw. It felt like I shouldn't be in the room for this. The guitars were screaming too. The interplay of wailing vocals felt like a clash of the gods ramping up and up until this. One little Bobby Whitlock ad-lib sent me into a spiral. I must have listened to that title track in full 3 times in a row before I even mustered up the strength for Thorntree. Never before or since has a listening experience affected me quite the way my first listen through Layla did. Because Layla didn't just change my music taste. Or my style, though both of those things are true. My infatuation with blues-based rock lingers, and Pattie Boyd is still the blueprint. I didn't realize this until my frontal lobe fully developed, I don't know, like 6 months ago. But somewhere down the line, I found myself seeking similarly messy, chaotic, toxic relationship dynamics as Layla. I was infatuated with the drama and the mystique because my stupid 20-year-old brain justified it with pain begets great art. Sure, I'm suffering, but if I stick it out, I could inspire something as beautiful as Layla. For the very few young women who watch this channel, a word of advice. Layla is the exception, not the rule. If a man is writing you love letters while you're in a relationship with someone else, and he gets closer to your partner to get closer to you, if he shows up to your home unannounced, threatens to harm himself if he won't be with you, dates your sister because he can't have you, fucking run. Run for the hills and do not look back, because that is not love, that is obsession. Though Layla was the exception, an exceptionally beautiful thing that came out of something so terribly destructive, Eric and Pattie were not the exception. They were the rule. The second Pattie was no longer the forbidden fruit, things went to shit. I guess that's another reason I've revisited this album now, because I learned some of those lessons the hard way. I have intimate knowledge of how hurtful this dynamic is and how hard it is to rebuild your life and your self-esteem after getting caught up in it. I now know who Eric Clapton is, and I know how shitty he's been, and yet I still love this album, because Layla is so much more than one relationship, one point in time, so much more than Eric Clapton. So many other amazing and talented people made this. I guess this is a good point to have a little Where Are They Now segment. Eric is still being Eric, of course, though he is no longer God, and you know, he's rocking with 100% less cocaine nowadays. Bobby Whitlock is happily married to his wife Coco. He seems to be enjoying being a musician and a visual artist. He's exhibited some of his work, like his version of the Layla art. He's got a YouTube channel. If you can understand a lick of what he's saying, it's a great time. Some years ago, he fell on hard times and tried selling the rights to his music. To help out his old friend, Eric bought them and gave the rights right back. I wish the stories of the rest of the Dominos were as nice. Carl Radel passed of a drug overdose in the 80s, and Jim Gordon killed his mom and spent the rest of his life in prison for it. That's another thing that has changed since the first time I covered this record. Jim Gordon has passed. That was a really weird memorial post to make. As for Pattie Boyd, she's 80 years old now, still making appearances at Beatle-related functions and enjoying the second phase of her career as a photographer and best-selling author. She's been happily married for 9 years now. He is not a musician, thank God. About the title track, she said, quote, "When Layla comes on the radio, it still gives me a jolt. It's part of my being." That's the magic of Layla. Why I still love Layla even after knowing so much for those involved in its creation and those looking from the outside in, or looking from the present to the distant past. Layla is a fiber of our beings. Beautiful as creation is, I've always favored destruction. It's why my favorite Doors song is The End, my favorite Jimmy song is Machine Gun, my favorite Cream song, Deserted Cities of the Heart. It's why my favorite part of every rock and roll show is when the boys smash up their instruments, why my favorite Hindu god has always been Shiva, and why rock and roll and God are only a hair's width apart in my mind. Layla and other assorted love songs songs comes in and destroys all you knew before, making way for something new and beautiful to grow. In my case, it made me learn self-respect the hard way, and it opened up a whole world to me. So many bands, so many songs I love, it all came from Layla just obliterating everything before. Layla broke me, and Layla made me. I suppose that's another problem, one I can't analyze my way out of just yet. Where does Layla end and Abigail DeVoe begin? The passionate, uncompromisingly joyful, occasionally unhinged AD character is connected to this album inextricably, and that's what AD is. A character. But 3 years on, she's a part of me too now. She's the Stitch next to Layla. I think the following quote is the closest I'll ever get to answering that question. Though parted, our two loving souls combine, for mine is all yours, and yours is mine. Two riddles to the world we represent, one answer each, the other's deep lament. But if our parting severs us in two, one radiant light envelops me and you. As from another world, though blocked and barred, what there is one, down here is forced apart. My personal favorites off this one are I Looked Away, Bell Bottom Blues, Keep On Growin', I Am Yours, Any Day, Tell the Truth, Little Wing, It's Too Late, Layla, and Thorn Tree in the Garden. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it. That's a wrap on Season 3 of Vinyl Monday. Firstly, I want to thank the patron saints of this channel, starting with Chris McGovern of the Gen X Muse Pod, for not only finding an incredible resource for this video, the long out-of-print Tom Dowd documentary, but for being the launch pad, in some ways, of my journey into podcasting. I want to thank Joe from the Play That Rock and Roll podcast for giving me the opportunity to co-interview BB Buell late last year. That was such an inspiration for starting the podcast as well. Thank you, Pat and Laura, for being such lovely guiding figures. My pen pal Alan, hand-me-down albums for you are holy grails on this side of the pond. And the mythical Dan, who gave me my first copy of Layla, as well as my copy of Kick Out the Jams. You, my fine sir, have a lot to answer for. I want to shout out some really cool friends of the show that have come along this season. Brian Wendorf, a close friend of the late, great Cynthia Plastercaster. Leo Beatty, you may know him better as the... It was only a matter of time before I pulled this one out again. You may know him better as the Leo on the inside of the Kick Out the Jams gatefold. And of course, we cannot forget Carl Ferris. Thank you to some more friends of the channel. My best friend in the whole world, Jack. You were around for the original Layla video. Trevin of Humble Fish, you've been around since then as well. See you next month in New York. My sister in podcasting and dear friend Emma. What a joy it is to basically FaceTime with you for a couple hours and turn that into our show. Thanks to the guys of Losing My Opinion. Can't wait to do a Dolls Pod crossover with you very soon. Thank you, Nancy of Vinyl Friday, for not only allowing me to hijack another day of the week with you, but for the sheer quality of your work pushing me to be a better content creator. And thank you, Lars Land, for the sheer quality of your work pushing me to up the standards of my own research. I hope we can cross over somewhere in the Beatleverse soon. I want to remember some rock and roll greats that we've lost over this past calendar year, beginning with Steve Albini, producer of the season premiere record In Utero, and some other 90s albums I just love. Mary Weiss, singer of one of my favorite girl groups, the Shangri-Las, French fashion icon, French pop icon, and astrologer, Francoise Hardy. And of course, two heroes of mine, Wayne Kramer and Dennis Thompson. And John Sinclair isn't even around to say anything about it because he's gone too. I'll have to do something special here for Heavy Lifting and the Five's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because honestly, it's about goddamn time. Lastly, I want to thank you, dear viewers, all 41 1,000 of you from all over the world who like the videos, who play along with my silly comment below games and take me to task when I get stuff wrong, who post episodes to the subreddits you're in and hype up my work on Twitter. I'm not on either platform. I'm scared of Reddit and I got booted off Twitter. All of you who are so enthusiastic about guessing what albums come next, to all who have sent a book, record, or magazine to the P.O. box, you who doubled this channel's size in just one season, you who recognize me in public. I can't go to gigs or vinyl fairs in peace anymore because of you. To all of you who have told each other stories in the comments of how a record has changed your lives, or those of you who say Vinyl Monday has helped get you into record collecting. You are the reason this failed art student gate-crashed the most notoriously gatekeepy community on the whole of YouTube. To those of you who are actively building a Vinyl Monday community, thank you. What do you think of Layla? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love, and remember, despite what some guy on the internet might say, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11, except for next week. Maybe the next couple weeks. I don't know, man. I'm tired and I need a fucking break. But my break won't start in earnest until Friday, the next episode of the Dolls podcast. Vinyl Monday will return for season 4 on either September 16th or 23rd. I haven't decided yet. You will be seeing something from me in that time. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next season, and Polydor Records, if you need someone to write the liner notes for the next Layla re-release, you know who to call. Bye!